The Peace Building Institute is one of Never Again Rwanda's great initiatives, and it's been bringing together youth from around the world. And this time around, this summer, 2015, it's bringing together youth from United States, Canada, being hosted by your friends, your peers from Rwanda. And I know all of you have different expectations, right? But you all want to learn what Rwanda can teach the world. And I'm here to learn from what you've learned over these 2 weeks that you've just spent here in Rwanda. So tell me, Josh, what have you learned? What did you find out on this trip?
It's something I kind of hit on in the last couple of weeks. A lot of what I've learned, watched, read, deals a lot with the number of deaths, who were the perpetrators, who were the survivors, who was the genocide perpetrated against, and then very select stories. So you like the movie Hotel Rwanda, and so you hear about very small stories, and then you hear about statistics. So coming here, what I wanted to get to know was a deeper emotional understanding of how it really affected the entire country, and how a country can go through such traumatic experiences that affected everybody. But then they found a way to not just rebuild and reconstruct, but to get to a point where they're even stronger now, where everybody's Rwandese and everybody has a sense of national pride. And to me, that's amazing. And so that's why I wanted to come here and understand from individual levels, the emotional level of how people can go through those experiences and rebuild and get to where they are now. So.
Mm-hmm. And now, Julie, I know you're very much into politics, right? Because you guys spoke about the right to protect, I think. Did you grasp this more? How the whole world failed to intervene to stop the genocide, and why they did? Did your trip here help in that regard?
Definitely. So it's actually interesting because last month before I came, I got to talk to Dr. Adam Simons, who is the global director for the Responsibility to Protect at an Armenian Genocide Conference last month. And I think that the lecture that we had on it, and then in the context of Rwanda and how the international community has failed in the past and how it's continuing to fail right now, I think that it made me open my eyes to the challenges we have to face in bringing that doctrine to light and making sure that those pillars are actually, being met, and that rather than countries using them as a way to, perhaps, infringe on sovereignty, but actually using it for its intended purpose. And I think that coming on this trip and seeing how Rwanda has taken responsibility for the actions of the genocide, but also how it's shown how the international community can participate in what the lessons that it needs to learn so that it never happens again. And that theme of never again, and rather than people just saying never again, but recognizing that genocide happens and that it's a terrible thing, but people can take the steps and can look at the steps of genocide and stop it before it happens. And that we need, all of us need to make our governments aware and to take the action so that it doesn't happen again.
So I want to know what struck you the most when you went to the Genocide Memorial both here and in Murambi, the image that will stay with you, unfortunately, for the rest of your life. Well, those are my own words, but you have yours. Briefly, what was the experience like?
I think Murambi was really hard for me. Specifically, I have a friend who's from Rwanda, and we're best friends in the States, and his dad is actually buried at that memorial. So I kind of lost it a little bit when I went there. But I think what will stay with me is the conversation I had with Jessica the most. We were standing and we were looking out at the view, and we had just gone into the rooms and seen the people and the children and the families. And she comes up to me and she said, "How can something so terrible happen in such a beautiful place?" And we just had a conversation about why does this happen, and how we'll never be able to fully understand. And so I think that's what I'm going to take away is we'll never be able to fully understand why it happened. It just happened. But what we can understand is that we can move forward and that we can progress. And that's what's going to stay with me the most from the memorials is seeing how horrible and how terrible it was and feeling not even a fraction of what everyone else that was involved felt. And knowing that how far they could fall and how far they've risen and where Rwanda is now. And I think that talking to my family, telling them about these experiences, it's been, oh my gosh, are you so sad? Are you so upset? And it's sad, but I think my biggest takeaway is hope. Hope that you can move forward and that it's going to get better.
Thank you, Maddie. Like you say, there's hope. There really is. And people have started, reconciling, which is unheard of in many societies. But we're a special country. There's no other choice than to reconcile and live together, try to make it work. So what could you tell your American peers? How does this chemistry, manage to work in Rwanda?
Well, I'm personally still trying to comprehend that myself, the sense of unity after something so terrible, how everyone is just banding together and moving forward and, progressing the country, being Rwandese, not dwelling on the past, not being tarnished by it, not allowing it to creep into your everyday life and bring you down and keep you in a lowly state, but to keep moving forward. The forgiveness after something so horrible is just striking and incomprehensible to me, but it seems to be working, and I'm trying to understand it. But it's a great thing.
One of the alumni, I think, is a filmmaker. One of his shows or film says forgiving and forgetting, right? So let's hear from Rwandan, Henry. What is your take on that guy's work, or even the concept, forgiving and forgetting? You'll be trying to help Jason understand a little better. How is it working, really? Your analysis as a Rwandan, as a young Rwandan who reflects about how the country can survive and move forward.
The concept itself, forgive, I believe it is possible to forgive, but forgetting that they took away your relatives, they took away your uncles, your brothers, and everyone, is something impossible. You may ask, is it forgiveness if you haven't forgotten? That would be a good question, but I would answer it this way. Forgiving is possible, and it can actually be forgiveness even when you have not forgotten the pain that you went through.
Well, I think you're putting your question to all of us, to anybody who wants to talk about that. Maybe Shannon wants to talk about that. You've studied other contexts as well, also based on the conversations you've had here. So what have you learned when it comes to forgiveness as a process and what it takes for it to be real?
First of all, I think forgiveness is something that you can't be told to forgive someone, and when you are told to forgive someone, that doesn't automatically mean that you can forgive them. So to me, I think of forgiveness as a personal choice. Another question, though, that was brought up that I hadn't thought of before is that is the question of, can you have full forgiveness if you do not love the person? So I guess that's something that the P.B.I. brought to my attention. Is that the full stage of reconciliation, and what does that mean if people can't get to that stage?
Well, he wants to say something. Thank you.
We discussed about reconciliation and from one of the documentaries, and the facilitator said that I think it was Florence, if I'm not mistaken, said that we are doing well as Rwanda, but reconciliation is an ongoing process. The same with, I would maybe dub it the forgiveness and reconciliation ideology. I think it is something that is not going to take us 20 years, 30 years or something. Maybe it may have to take us generations to forgive and to fully love each other, like back in the history when we communed with each other and intermarried with each other.
Thank you, Henry. Did you want to say something about that? Yeah, sure.
For me, I think that once you are just forgiving someone, it's good, but the act of forgetting what he has done, I think forgetting will push him in other temptation to do it again. Mm-hmm. I think we need to remember and forgive.
Good.
For me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I know you also went to CNLG, the Commission for the Fight Against Genocide, and I think they talked about the strategies to prevent genocide. Does that come as one of the strategies to value such heroic actions, or do you think it should have prominent place, or anything else that stuck with you when you went to CNLG?
At CNLG, what I learned is putting in perspective the organization of preventing genocide, how there are practical solutions to doing so, and how, it all comes back to continuing to be militant and active against denial, which is an issue, and seeing how the country organizes itself to prevent genocide from happening, not only here, but in other parts of Africa. So it shows that Rwanda has come full circle in that regard.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk to Alice. So talk to me about the prevalence of trauma here and how they are handled in the context of promoting reconciliation. Is the country, is the community addressing those traumatic wounds efficiently?
The country or the government, what did for those problems of trauma, just promoting reconciliation, like cooperation, working together, encouraging forgiveness, so that when someone asks to forgive, giving well the information of how things were done. If is the one who killed your family, come and explain for you. For those who are survivors, not possible, not easy to forgive. It's not easy.
I want to go back to Julie. Do you think Rwandans have any alternative other than to reconcile? You've seen the layout of the country. Was there any choice? Which leads me to trying to understand, if it's not a choice, then is it real? Then is it genuine?
I think that's something that I've been trying to, find out myself more when I've been here, and that's why when we went to the village in Huye, having those actual discussions between the perpetrators and the survivors who willingly came together to truly reconcile. I think that's like a challenge with the with a lot of these like reconciliation initiatives is if you're, because obviously the government has to have these initiatives in place to try and help facilitate that reconciliation. With all of those facts is that like reconciliation is it's a necessary process. And so while some of these programs, or sometimes it seems like the government is, you know, forcing these people to come together, I think that from what I've heard and the narratives I've read, is that the survivors know that to be at peace and to be able to continue their lives, that they have to forgive and that they have to find it within themselves to have the strength to overcome the trauma that they've endured so that they can continue living. And so a big theme that I've seen with the survivors I've talked to in Rwanda and the United States is that they don't want their children's future to be their past. They want to overcome everything, that they're committed to unity and Rwandanness so that they can, you know, continue to live and so Rwanda can prosper.
Thank you. Henry has a different point of view, right?
To me, the reconciliation process started with a lot of pressure to forgive, rather than a lot of room to not forgive and forgive later. So, and that pressure was nothing other than political pressure. We have released 40,000 prisoners. Deal with them, you know, deal with them. And they also have to deal with you. So one is on the other end scared, and the other one is on the other end as well, fearing to pass by his father or her father's land, so that so and so will not do any harm. So there was a lot of pressure. But besides that, I know of different cases that looked very, very genuine in the forgiving process.
Those are very important questions, but let me go back to my friend Josh, who can clarify. You know, as you comment on what he said, let me take you back to your trip to the museum. Maybe Rwandans, maybe the international community can draw from Rwandan culture and history to understand why they made those decisions, to try to heal a society that was completely broken with such urgency, so to speak. Was there anything that you found when you went to the museum that was deeply rooted in our culture, that was positive maybe, that you didn't know, and that could probably be applied today to help us re-emerge from that deep a hole where we fell?
I think it might have been political pressure to forgive, but I also think it was almost a necessity in order to get to where Rwanda needed to be, to have that national pride, and in order to move forward. You know, it probably was hard to forgive. In a lot of cases, it might not have been a sincere apology. It could have been political pressure. And I think the best way to get over that is, but like he said, remember what happened, but forgive. Even though it's not easy, I don't think I'm making any sense, but to get back to what it was before colonization, where people were Rwandese, and just kind of move forward from there, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think it does. So, can we go back to the way it was before colonization, and was everything positive back then? Because there's a trend sometimes to think, well, grass is greener elsewhere, you know, maybe in the past than it is today. Is it possible to restore our society as it was in terms of values? What are the values that that this society needs to restore, that it used to have before colonization, as Josh says?
Okay. I think looking at the past of Rwanda, how the kingdom leadership was structured, and the values of Rwandan is very common. So nowadays we can pick some values in the past of Rwanda, then we apply them now. It's possible, but it's not everything, because we need also to develop. We need to go with the modern world. The system which is being used nowadays of home ground solutions. Now I'm talking about gacaca. Gacaca is one thing which is traditional in the past of Rwanda. When there was a problem, all the community, I mean the people who abide in a region where there was a conflict, they have to sit together. Then they raise up the problem, they sat in what we call umuchacha. That's where the word gacaca comes from.
I want to know how far we've come overcoming the stigma around ethnic groups. So I think Danae has something to say about that. How are we going to reach a point where, though Josh says it used to be social classes, there's still a debate about that. Whatever it was, how are we going to overcome that stigma around Hutus, Twas, Tutsis, to move on and embrace citizenship as above everything else?
I think, because, like what Henry was saying, that the people were forced to reconcile or anything. If the government hadn't done what they did, I don't think we'll be where we are right now. Or if the lady who accepted to forgive, like what he said, for her to use her land or anything, I don't think, I think she was doing it for her children. Maybe in her heart she's not convinced that she has forgiven that man or anything, but she's just doing it for the sake of the future generation, which I think is true. If we continue to not dwell in our past or talk about it, if our parents don't talk about it, then we won't know about it. If my parents don't come and say you're Tutsi, you're Twa, if the government doesn't promote it, if we continue like this, I think our children, our grandchildren will not be facing such ethnic divisionism. If we continue like this, it's going to work. We're going to get there.
Thank you, Danae. You have something to say about the same issue, right? Yeah, go ahead.
There is something that is taking place in this country that most people actually look at it from the economic perspective. That is the issue of opening up our borders. For all countries, for example, all Africans don't need to apply for a visa when they're in their countries to come to Rwanda. They can get the visa on arrival. And the government strategy is that let's open up this country. Let's have our children go outside to study. For example, the presidential scholarship program, where over 300 young Rwandans every year are sent to the US at Oklahoma Christian University to study. And even as some of us, we are supposed to go to other universities to study. The moment we go as young people, we go there, we see the world beyond our communities. For example, when you go to the United States, you find that Afro-Americans and white Americans are living together. When you go to South Africa, you see the same thing. And these guys wake up every day and go to office, yet they are distinctively actually very different. One is black, another one is white. Whereas here, because someone has a bigger nose and someone has a smaller nose, and yet we're the same color, we speak the same language, you realize actually that there's no reason for me to hate this person. It becomes very stupid. And because those who are different, more different than me, are living together, and those who are not, and those who are more or less different are fighting each other. So I believe that as we travel, as the education system shifts and we open up our borders and we have more people coming in and we interact and we open up our world, our nation to visitors, that's the only way as Rwandans we shall come to appreciate our little differences, and then we aspire for bigger things.
Thank you. very much. We were talking with somebody, a pastor yesterday, who was telling us that the youth under 25 years old here account for more than 60% of the population, and that those were the hope of for our country. And I want you to analyze that. We have that youth, the majority of the population, but we have an older generation that could be not as advanced in terms of peaceful cohabitation or a positive ideology. How will that youth prevail in the midst of such a deeply divided society that hasn't fully healed yet? I saw Henry, he wanted to say something, but also say something about that one as well, as we move towards the end of our conversation here.
That's a very, very good question. The younger generation actually doesn't have any choice other than to, like you said, impose it on the older generation. Who we are internally as clans and tribes is a fact. We can't run away from that. So I think that there are many ventures in which we can impose it, especially ventures where it is our responsibility to work on it. Where it's our responsibility, we can still do something too.
The country, its leadership has to deal with all these enormous questions and contradictions and challenges. I'd like you to comment on how the country has been managing this. What kind of job has it done so far? You went to RGB. You know all the processes in place and the progress made. So I'd love you to address that. But let's listen to Jessica and then you. Thank you. If you want, you can say something about that one as well.
Take that one.
Mm-hmm. What?
I'll let Madeline take that one.
Okay.
But what I was going to say is, coming from being Rwandan in the diaspora, what I feel is that sense of national identity. That's what I've learned. That's what I'm bringing with me, is that just pride of being a Rwandan. So I'm learning about my history more now. I'm learning about, the pre-colonial era. I'm learning about all of the clans and the tribes that were there at that time. So those things are, they don't really have that strong of a voice for me. But what I do know is that what is going to be important is for the Rwandans all over the world to contribute something to their country, to bring something home. And if we have that spirit of that identity, that national identity of wanting to bring something home, wanting to share what we have with our country, then that can quell that gap between the older generation that clings on to those tribal differences.
So all those contradictions and challenges are being addressed by some people. So what credit do you give them? How good a job are they doing? What stands out, really? That's what I'd like to know.
Overall, what I've learned is that the government keeps taking solutions from the people. So what I've noticed is that it's not the government is saying, oh, here's a problem, and we're going to solve it, and then we're going to throw the solution back in your face, and you have to handle it. It's been more of they're listening to the problems, and they're taking ideas and solutions from the community, and they're turning it back to the community, and they're letting the community work together and do, like in Gachacha or in Umuganda, or doing all these different homegrown solutions. So I think that, yes, there have been contradictions, but I think that the solutions have come from the people more so than they have been fully government produced.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. I don't want to keep you longer than this. You've been so generous, and I've been honored to have this hour with you. Like I said, this is the best thing that I've seen at Never Again. So I hope you guys share the experience and the message with your friends and your and the community where you came from. Before we conclude, who's coming back for the next P.B.I. or the next something in Rwanda?
I'm actually planning on attending graduate school in Belgium next year. So I've been talking with Dr. Wolf and Dr. Joe, and it seems like I'm probably going to be able to come back next summer and do like a 4-month internship before I head to grad school. So that's my plan. It's been a beautiful country. Everybody that not just the P.B.I. participants, but people we've met on the streets or the different villages, anywhere we've been, everybody's been so hospitable and generous. And I've been walking around Kigali at sometimes 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, never felt unsafe. It's just been an amazing place. Every day I get to look out my window and see that view, and it's been an amazing place that I don't know, to always be with me. I don't want to go home.
Okay, you're welcome to stay. I know you appreciate our cuisine. There's one dish we cook which is called, it's cassava, but we call it gumino. That's the nickname, which means stay, or don't go, or don't leave. So, all right, thank you so much, and continue enjoying your stay until you go home. I stay here. I get to stay here for, forever. Thank you very much.